Hey guys, how are you doing today? In this video, we're gonna help Piu Piano, a restaurant chain, reduce their ingredient losses. You're gonna get first a case question, which should be the first initial question of this case, and then I'm not gonna show you an answer for that. You can draw yours if you want, and then we're gonna move on to the follow-up question that the interviewer would ask you anyway, regardless of what your answer was, which is a chart interpretation question, which is the drill we wanna do. So let's get to the case question. So, Piu Piano, an Italian restaurant chain with 80 locations in the UK, has been facing a problem with losses. They lose, on average, 10% of the food they purchase versus 6% of benchmark. They've hired you to help them solve that issue. How would you help them? Now, you can pause this video and craft your own answer for this. I won't show you mine, but it'll be good practice for you. Now, regardless of what you say, the interviewer is going to say, well, that's very interesting. Now, take a look at this. What do you think? And he's going to show you Exhibit 1. Remember, before you start coming up with your answer, remember the 3 steps I showed you in the 3-step approach and try to apply them to this case. Now, before we start to understand this chart, there are several questions you could have asked. What I would ask here is, just to be sure, are those 4 ingredients the 4 ingredients in which we have the most losses? And the answer, of course, is yes in this case. And so does losses as a percentage of purchases mean this 50%, for example, that we lose 50% of the raspberries that we buy in value? And yes, that's correct. That's it. I can see that we only have raspberry in 1 dish. Is that right? Yes. And 8% of the tabs have at least 1 dish with raspberry in it. Okay. And 38% of total Piu Piano's losses are raspberries. Okay, so now I understand all of the metrics there. I understand what this chart's telling me, and I can start analyzing. All right, so what I can see here initially is that raspberry has a lot more losses than... Oh, wait, sorry, 1 second. There's one last thing that I want to understand here. What are the units in the first chart? And the interviewer will tell me, well, don't worry about the values themselves, but it's something equivalent to money. So it's a money equivalent. It's not really 100 pounds, 200 pounds, or 100,000 pounds. It's just a money equivalent. Okay, that's fair enough. So the first thing I can see here is raspberry has a lot more losses than the other ingredients, over double what they have. So it seems like there's an issue there. And what I can see next is that raspberries account for between 1/3 and 2/5 of total losses of Piu Piano. So it's a lot of losses. There is a problem there, definitely. And if we can solve it, we might be able to solve Piu Piano's loss problem. What I can see next is losses with raspberries are 50% of purchases, whereas losses with other ingredients that lose a lot are tops 6%. So if we reduce losses with raspberry from 50% to 6%, that's reducing it by around 95% or something. Is that right? Yeah, close to 90%, sorry. So close to 90%. And this means that we would reduce that 38% to around 4% of losses. And so we will reduce total losses by 32%. So that might bring us to around 6.5% of purchases and losses rather than 10%. Okay? So if we could solve the raspberry loss problem, we'll probably be solving the totality of the losses problem of Piu Piano. And next, raspberries are in only 1 dish and only in 8% of tabs. So my first guess is that we purchase raspberries for this 1 dish, and in many days, no one orders that dish or any dish with raspberry, because that's only 1, and they end up going bad because raspberries don't last that long. And so that would be a good hypothesis for why we're losing so many raspberries. Of course, there are others that we need to test. And just a parenthesis here, take a look at this. This left-hand column here is different in all aspects. So the bar is a lot higher, bar is a lot taller. The losses as percentage of purchases is way off what all the other numbers here are. Number of dishes that have that ingredient is way off. Number of tabs that have, percentage of tabs that have any of those dishes is way off. And percentage of total losses is, well, above 100% off. So this is not a very hard case, but if you're not straightforward, if you're not action guided, you could still screw it up. Okay? So the main point that I want to show you here is that you can find some of the insights, you can find several insights if you try in this specific case, but you want to have them all action guided, action oriented. Okay? That's what a lot of people get wrong, and that's what I want you to get right in your interviews. Okay? Now, let's move on. So, it seems like our losses with raspberries are the main cause of the excess ingredient losses our clients facing. If we bring those losses down to normal levels, our ingredient losses could even be below benchmark at 6.5%. Since there is only one dish and in less than 10% of tabs, raspberries can get bad so quickly, it might be that we're losing them because some days there are so little orders that the raspberries we have end up getting bad. If that's really why they're getting bad, we could replace raspberries for some other ingredient that lasts longer. We could do something so that raspberries don't get bad, like freezing them, or we could even replace the whole dish with something else. But before doing anything, I'd want to figure out two things. Number one, maybe the cause of losses isn't that raspberries are getting bad. Maybe it's because they're being stolen. Maybe they're coming from suppliers in bad conditions, or maybe we're storing them in poor conditions. I need to find out what that is before I do anything, so I won't be acting on the wrong root cause. And number two, I want to find out whether that dish specifically is bringing a lot of business by itself. Because if that's not the case, I wouldn't have much problem removing it from the menu. If that is the case, I try to first leverage that by adding other raspberry dishes in the menu, and that would even make raspberries turn over quicker and get less bad. And number two, I could change something so that raspberries don't go bad. Like I could change storage. Maybe I could do some research and see if there's a way to store them in a way or in a place where they'll last longer. Or maybe I could do something to get them to be ordered more frequently. Okay? Before we move on, I want to show you something off the records. Okay? Take a look at this. I said our ingredient losses could be even below benchmark at 6.5%. Then I said, since they're in only one dish and less than 10% of our tabs, blah, 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 it might be that we're losing them because blah, blah, blah. What I'm going to show you here is quantification. If you can have this, in your answer, it's really, really good. So practice to be able to do that in your interview. Number two, I want to show you this. Here in this paragraph, I showed some hypotheses of what could be done in case that was really why they're getting bad. And then in this last paragraph here, I showed actual next steps. Your next steps could also be other things. Yeah, you could not have given these next steps that I did. You could have just said reasons why they could get bad. You could have just said what to do if that's really why they're getting bad, and then said, but we need to figure out why they're really getting bad. You could have said lots and lots of things. But not giving next steps, not saying something action-oriented is a big problem. Because, well, number one, you need them, right? They're one of the steps, of the 3 steps that I told you that you have to follow. But number two is because I want to make sure that you're reading charts as a consultant. I want to make sure that your insights are connected to the case question, rather than doing what most people do, that's just trying to find random patterns, regardless of how useful they are to the client. And the way consultants read charts and the way you need to read charts is look at everything and think, what does this mean to my client? What can we do? What can the client do? And that's why I tell you to always have next steps. They don't necessarily need to be the same as mine, but they need to be something towards solving the case, something towards giving your client an answer, something towards telling your client what to do. And that's why I want you to use next steps. They don't necessarily need to be what I said. You could have brainstormed causes, you could have brainstormed solutions, you could have said what analysis you need to do, you could have done only one of these three things. It's not a problem, and your brainstormings could be different than mine, your analysis that you want to do next could be different than mine, but you need to be saying something to do next that is related to the case and that moves you closer to answering the question. Okay? Now, after everything, regardless of what you said, the interviewer is going to say, well, that's very interesting. Now take a look at this and tell me what you think. So this is Exhibit 2, and I want to point something out to you here before we move on. And that is, the case could be over here, this case question could be over here. But I made this to show you that a chart interpretation question can go any way. It could even go in towards showing you the actual restaurant menu. And I didn't ask for this. I didn't ask to understand the dish. I didn't ask to see the menu, but it doesn't matter. The interviewer still asked me what I thought of that. It doesn't mean that I was right, and it doesn't mean that I was wrong. It's just the piece of data that the interviewer had, and he wanted to know what I think of that. In a real life scenario, for example, it could be that my manager and I went there for dinner, because we like being customers in our clients' facilities from time to time, just to see how it's going. And the manager's attention was caught by this in the menu, and he asked me what I thought. This could be the case. This could be the real life situation. It could be that we're having dinner there with the client, and the client asked me what I think. It could be anything like that. Okay? So now, pause this video, come up with your answer, and then, well, listen to mine. Well, before I started, I would definitely ask my interviewer. So this looks like it's Piupiano's menu, the dessert part of the menu, and it seems like I'm looking at the one dish that actually has raspberry in it. Am I right? Is that right? Yes, that's right. And just to be sure, are we using fresh raspberries in this raspberry Pi, or are we using frozen raspberries? And maybe he'd say, I don't know. He'd probably say we're using fresh raspberries. Yeah, in this case, he'd say we're using fresh raspberries. And so, okay, what I can see here is that this dish is a dessert. And what this means is that it's unlikely to be the customer's choice driver. Okay? It could be, though, but if that's the case, then likely there would be many tabs that with only that dessert, or with only desserts in it. And, well, I could take a look at the tabs that do have this dessert, and what do they have in them. And next, I can, well, I'd like to know if we're using fresh berries again. So we could be making this pie with frozen raspberries inside rather than fresh raspberries either inside or outside. If they're in the pie, it's easier to do that. If they're currently out of the pie, we could think about putting them inside and frozen, of course. This highlights the idea of either removing the dessert or changing the recipe, because if this dish really is not driving people to my restaurant, then maybe the people who are consuming it would just have another dessert, or maybe they would not have desserts, but that's not as bad as losing, well, 8% of my tabs. Okay? And the next step here, in my opinion, would be talking to the customers who ordered this to understand how important the dessert is to them specifically and what they like about it. So if the dish is really important to them, maybe we could even raise the price or make other raspberry options. And, well, I just thought of something. We should also ask them if they'd come anyway if we didn't have the Raspberry Pi option. And to know if that's important to them, we could also change this pie and test it with frozen raspberries or with some other ingredient or with something else in the menu instead of that in some other locations as a pilot. Okay? And I would also talk to the chefs and understand how we could change this recipe if we could while preserving the taste. Okay? That would be, in my opinion, that would be done after doing the next steps that I said before from the last chart. Okay? Well, this was my answer for this. If your answer is different than mine, don't worry. Just look at the step-by-step video that I showed you and try to see if the elements that I mentioned are in your answer. If they are, then it's okay. We don't need to have the same answer. We need to have you reading charts like a consultant. All right? Well, see you in the next video.